This is Frank Quinn, Editorial Director of Supply Chain Management Review, and I'd like to welcome everyone to our webcast on locking in supply chain capacity. And we're joined today by Karen Caswelch, CEO of Akoya, and Karen will be discussing an innovative solution to ensure a smooth, continuous flow of product from suppliers and to improve overall intelligence for supply chain management. Then she'll relate an interesting case study of a major manufacturer who used the Akoya solution to assure foundry capacity for production processes. Now, Karen has served in senior supply chain positions in several major corporations. Prior to joining Akoya, she was Vice President of Purchasing at Allison Transmission, and as a manager at GM for 16 years, she held leadership positions in supply chain, manufacturing, and quality planning. Karen holds an MBA from the Harvard Business School and a BS degree in mechanical engineering from MIT. And among a number of recognitions in her career, Karen holds the Managerial Excellence Award from the National Women of Color. And before we turn things over to Karen, I just wanted to tell all the folks tuning in that we will have a Q&A session at the end of Karen's presentation, so we encourage you to stay tuned for that. And at this point, it's a real pleasure to welcome Karen Caswelch.
Thank you, Frank. I appreciate the introduction. I joined Akoya about 2 years ago and found a really interesting opportunity to create business intelligence for the supply chain and the management of the supply chain. You know, when you look at big companies, the real critical problem that they're trying to focus on is keeping their suppliers from disrupting production. And, you know, that even though a lot of purchasing organizations focus on cost, and that's clearly a critical driver, the real thing that they worry about when they go to bed at night, when they wake up in the morning is, gee, I hope the line doesn't go down because the supplier impacted production. Now, there's a lot of things that you can do on a day-to-day basis, and I'm not going to talk about that. What I really want to talk about is the underlying root causes of why suppliers disrupt production. Things like you've got complex standards causing production scheduling inefficiencies. Your supplier portfolio, the parts they're making for you, is really not aligned with the supplier core capacity and capability. In today's environment, you always are worried about financially troubled suppliers. And then when you're designing new parts and new products, you want to have really solid supplier and engineering collaboration during the product development process. And then finally, if you have capacity issues at all tiers of your supply base, then you have the risk of that disrupting production. Bottom line is every day you've got thousands of parts from hundreds of suppliers arriving in your assembly facilities, and the reality is any one of those parts could cause a loss of production, which will impact your sales and profits. So the solution is that you want to engineer a world-class supply base, and you want to do that really across all areas of your product development process, from early on in the process to when you're in the support and service mode with your product. Early in the development process, you want to identify the most capable and least cost suppliers. You really want to have good supplier collaboration with your engineering team. You want to select your lowest cost materials for the part, and you want to look at using similar parts in your existing library to make sure that the engineers aren't redesigning similar parts. Now, further into the process, once you're in production, you want to know whether you have the right supplier from a cost, quality, and delivery perspective. You really want to know if the parts sourced with that supplier is a good fit for the supplier business. You spend a lot of time looking and trying to ensure that the supplier is financially sound. And then you really like to have some backup, whether you want to know are there alternative suppliers within your current supply base for the parts just in case something happens. So the Akoya solution helps identify existing parts during the new part design process. It can help estimate new part pricing and potential suppliers, help your engineers simplify material specifications, and then once you're in production, you can build negotiation strategies with detailed supplier and part data, ensure capacity through your supply tiers, quickly access data to address supplier disruptions and understand what makes suppliers competitive on price, quality, and capability. And then in the long run, you want to identify and help implement cost reductions, identify supply-based risk, and reassign parts quickly and efficiently. Now, we've created a solution that really benefits the entire enterprise, both on a functional basis as well as up and down the different functions. You look at the VP of purchasing, they want to know that they've got an improved supply base and they're adding value from a financial perspective to the business. The buyer really just wants to be able to make informed decisions and negotiate better, and our tool helps both the VP of purchasing as well as the buyer. From an engineering perspective, you can find similar parts rather than designing from scratch, and also learning what previous engineers have done, how they've designed similar parts in the past. Your VP of engineering really wants to know what the target pricing of the new designs and new products are to ensure that they're profitable. So our solution mines the business intelligence, mines the intelligence both within the purchasing database as well as the engineering database. From a purchasing data perspective, we extract data mostly from ERP systems, but also delivery systems and quality systems, and identify things like what's the annual volume, who is the supplier for the part, what plant within your facility is that part going to? Is it going to multiple plants? Are you buying the same part from multiple suppliers? That type of thing. And then we also extract the features of the part from the actual CAD drawing. So you think about the weight of the part, what kind of material is the part made of, if it's a machine part, how much surface machining there is, what kind of tolerances do you have, is it heat treated, is it not heat treated? And we take those two sets of data and apply our patented analytics. So we have three major analytics that we apply to the data to then deliver the output. The first is comparable parts. Given that we know all the features of the parts within the commodity category, we can identify comparable parts that you've already designed within your database. We also have an analytic that infers supplier capability based on the features of the parts that are manufactured at that supplier. And the idea is if you're making similar parts and an engineer designs a new part that's similar to the parts that you're making, you should be able to also manufacture those parts. The third analytic is target pricing. It's a multivariate linear regression with complex interaction terms. That's the complex version of it. The fairly simple version is it's a statistical analysis of the price of the parts based off of the features that are within those parts. The difference between this and what people typically understand, people understand activity-based costing, which is a process-driven analysis where you look at how do you make the part and then add up all the costs. This is actually a statistical top-down analysis. So we apply those analytics and then deliver powerful dashboards across all levels of the organization. We have an executive dashboard for the C-suite, and then present an engineering dashboard to the engineering organization, commodity supply chain dashboard and procurement dashboard to the supply chain organization, and the suppliers dashboard actually gets presented to the suppliers and helps them evaluate whether the parts they're making for you are competitive and whether they're a good fit for their own portfolio. So in summary, the Akoya product helps you improve your supply processes, It gives a tool to your team that really integrates into your product cycle while improving the processes that impact suppliers and helping reduce production disruptions. It's a very fast return on investment. Most of our customers have had between a 4 and 6 month return on the investment, and over 1 year have achieved usually in the 10-to-1 ratio in terms of savings. We do have proprietary analytics that really give the companies the power to understand both product cost and features across their supply base and across really thousands of parts. We access both the purchasing and engineering knowledge that's already locked away in your existing systems. It's a very fast deployment. It's a cloud-based deployment, so we don't interact in a major way with the IT organization. And it's a web-based product, so anyone around the world can have access to your data. And our team has really strong technical and purchasing expertise to help your specific process. Okay. Next, I'd like to talk about the foundry capacity project that one of our major customers asked us to conduct. When they came to us, they said, look, the last time our revenue increased by 20%, our profits remained flat. And that's primarily because we were struggling with capacity. And in fact, we're especially concerned with aluminum, iron, and steel foundries because over the last 2 years, a number of those foundries closed, and we know it takes 2 years for foundries to bring on new capacity. So can you help us identify how much capacity we need at the foundries so that we can go and negotiate long-term capacity deals with the foundries? So our solution was to deliver to them the ability to forecast 5-year capacity so that they could negotiate their requirements with the foundries to assure supply. So we had 13,000 castings in our database for this customer, and most manufacturing companies, they see their tier 1 suppliers. So we had a tier 1 supplier for all 13,000 of those castings, and so the first step was, well, we need to find out who's the tier 2 foundry. So our process this go around was to query every foundry and say, well, which parts are you making for this customer? One of the things we also captured in the query was the rough part weight, so that we then could deliver an accurate forecast at the foundry level. The downside to this process was that there was really a significant amount of data cleansing because each one of those 23,000 rows that we got from the foundries, we had to ensure that was linked correctly to the tier 1 supplier. So the next time that we update the tier 1, tier 2 links, we're actually going to the tier 1. We know who the old foundry was, so we're going out to the tier 1 and saying, who is the foundry for this part? Is it the same foundry? Has it changed? And that will significantly speed up the process. So we merged the tier 1 and tier 2 foundry and part number file with the exploded 5-year forecast for this company. And then we delivered the output in a web-based environment, so buyers really all over the world could have access to the output and use this to negotiate. So if you look at the output, we have the annual tonnage, and the web-based output was by the receiving facility of this customer, and then also by foundry facility. So for this plant, you could see which foundry was providing how much annual tonnage of iron. Now, when you look at this, you'd say, okay, this is really interesting, And the reality is that a consulting company, anybody could really do this analysis. It was the next step of the analysis that Akoya really was able to add a lot of value. So we started off by getting all the base data into the system. So the next step for our customer was they went out and said, we need to secure capacity. And one of the things they found out is during their negotiations, it was actually clear that a number of the foundries just weren't going to have enough capacity over the next 5 years. But they also had a foundry that said, hey, one of these, my foundry has 250 metric tons of available capacity. We'd be interested in bringing some more business to this foundry and filling it up with your parts. So we worked with the foundry with the available capacity. We modeled the open capacity with our supplier capability metrics, and then evaluated across the foundries that were over capacity, and identified 250 parts from the capacity constrained foundry, and identified what is the best fit for the new foundry, which parts should go to which foundry. So we were able in really about 48 hours to deliver to our customer, here's the first draft of your sourcing strategy to move the parts to help you secure your capacity. So that was the first step of the project, secure the capacity. And then the next step is, hey, once we've got the capacity, how do we work with the foundries to improve their throughput? So we identified the different material specifications and the relative tonnage poured at each foundry, and then we worked with the customer to evaluate both the complexity at each foundry as well as the complexity per material specification. So if you look at this chart, you've got the material specifications across the top, and then you've got the different foundries along the side, and you've got 3 material specifications that have these material specifications across a lot of different foundries. And that's not healthy from a foundry capacity perspective, because you've got a lot of foundries then doing a lot of different material specs, never having a really good pour. And so let's say they run they run a specification once a month. Well, if you get an order in the day after that specification is running, you're waiting potentially another 4 weeks before that specification's running. So it's really not a good process. One of the reasons why this happens is because the customer isn't making the decision about which foundry. You've got the tier 1 machining supplier who's making the decision and sourcing the foundries. So the next step for this customer is to validate specific specs at a handful of foundries, try to consolidate those foundries, and then work with their tier 1 suppliers to move parts so that you're not running 10 specs at low volumes across 10 different foundries. The other strategy is then looking at specific foundries that are pouring a lot of low volume specifications. So in this case, you've got one foundry who's really covering a too broad a number of material specifications, and in this case, same thing. The customer is working with both the tier 1 suppliers as well as the foundry to try to consolidate the specifications at that foundry so that they can have larger heats when they're doing their parts and the specifications. So that's kind of step 2 in the process. Then step 3 in the process is to work with the engineering organization to really evaluate material specifications. And you say, well, how does the engineering organization do it today? Well, it's kind of hard because there's really not a good way for them to get the intelligence out of the CAD model to see, gee, what is everyone else doing? What have engineers done in the past? So we're providing information to the engineering organization to help them look across product families and look at the material specification fragmentation across those families so that they can really start to evaluate, gee, I've got pulleys here. I've got 222 parts with one specification, and then I have like a part of another and a part of another. I've got a whole bunch of parts that are all pulleys that are all different specifications, and that's driving complexity all the way throughout the supply chain. So in summary, this Fortune 50 global manufacturer used Akoya to secure their 5-year foundry requirements. They moved over 100 parts to foundries with open capacity in less than 6 months. They all had a target price assigned to them, so it was a very fast, really a very fast negotiation and a very fast move. The quarterly updates to the 5-year capacity plan are loaded, and they have that within 7 days of the new forecast release. And then the manufacturer has the intelligence to create a material specification consolidation strategy with their tier 2 foundries, improving throughput and cost structure at the foundry level. And they also have the intelligence for engineers to design for the foundry supply base, which helps them create long-term competitiveness across their business.
Karen, thanks very much for a great presentation. Certainly an interesting case study, and obviously, very, very valuable solution for this company. We've got some time for some Q&A, and in addition to my questions, the audience members are welcome to type in any inquiries or comments they have in the appropriate box on their screen, and just send them in, and we'll get them answered for you. And Karen, as you were going through, particularly the case study part of your presentation, I was thinking about the users and the training requirements that they needed, in order to be able to use the solution. Could you give us a sense of what level of training is needed, and how is that provided?
So actually, one of the requirements as we were developing our product was that it had to be simple enough that someone like me could use it, because I wasn't very technically good at complex programs. So we manage the training, and we usually run a 1-hour training session, and bring people in. They go online. They get to play with their data during the training session, and what we found is that the system's pretty straightforward to use, and so the training is actually not that complex and not that hard. In this case, with this customer, we sat down with the main user of the system. We trained him in a half an hour, and he really hasn't had any questions. He just goes in, he uses what he needs to use. Mm-hmm.
Right. And did you say if someone needed to have some questions answered or needed a refresher, there are online resources that will allow the user to get those answers, to get that question solved?
Yeah, absolutely. We have both online support as well as there's a help desk.
Right. Good. Thinking about the analytics capability that you described, my question is: does your technology have analytics capability and supplier data for all industries? In other words, is it preloaded, so to speak, or do you have to create this based upon the particular client, the client's company, and the client's industry?
Yeah, we create this for the client and the customer. So the specific commodities that the customer wants to use, and the analytics really work across pretty much any commodity, castings, forgings, plastics, hoses. So we've actually created 10 to 12 different commodity categories already, and haven't found a whole lot of categories that we cannot analyze. When people come to us, we talk to them, and most of the time we're able to create the analytics around that. The value then is that if you've got some very specific and specialized requirements, the analytics can comprehend those requirements versus we just have a baseline analytic.
Mm-hmm. So it doesn't sound as if there's a lot of upfront work that needs to be done. I mean, typically a typical engagement in terms of the analytics portion of it. Is that a correct assessment?
Yeah, when it's actually about an 8-week implementation, and that includes gathering the parts, getting the connections within the company, and then we spend about 4 weeks with the analytics and tuning the analytics to the customer's business. Right.
I was interesting slide on the dashboards, and I'm wondering how does a company or what do you recommend a company do to control access to the dashboards? In other words, you want the right people having access to those dashboards, and how do you determine who's the right person or people, and what sort of best practice in this area?
Yeah, we actually sit down with the user and identify who are the right people to use the dashboard. In the case of a purchasing organization, it's the buyers and the buyer leadership, and they tend to be most purchasing organizations tend to be very careful about how much information is spread across the organization. All of this is password protected and very highly secure. Right.
Speaking of purchasing and the sort of their proprietary point of view, obviously there's different parts of functional areas of the organization in implementing this solution. As one of your slides showed, you have purchasing and engineering, manufacturing, logistics, and sometimes these functional areas don't always work together in closely coordinated unanimity. So I'm wondering, any tips you give your clients on getting the functional areas of the organization to work together in implementing the solution?
One of the things that is really important is that the organizations can speak each other's language. And so what I've seen with our customers is now the purchasing organization can go and talk to the engineers, and they've got the features accessible to them. They understand comparable parts. They can talk to them about material specifications, and they can do that without actually having to have access to the CAD system and go in on a part-by-part basis to talk to them through the CAD system. So, I think this is a real, especially as most manufacturers are seeing a fairly large turnover as the baby boomers start retiring. And as you hire new employees and younger ones without the experience, they now have at their fingertips pictures of the parts, lists of features of the parts, and they can go and have that conversation with the engineers. So this is something to really help facilitate, I'd say, an intelligent conversation across functions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it creates kind of I guess you say it, a commonality that all of the functional areas can relate to, and everyone's sort of playing off the same tool, the same playbook, so to speak. And one thing, again, referring to the case example that you discussed, I think you referenced a 5-year forecast that this company was responding to. How or what role does your technology play in helping ensure that that forecast is accurate in the first place. So, so the technology can then do what it does in terms of, assuring capacity in this case.
Yeah, in this case, the reality is that we were not we weren't able to identify anything to feed back to them to say, hey, we think there's a problem with the forecast. Right. They're actually looking at changing the way they forecast because they're not convinced of the level of accuracy, but at least on a gross level, they were able to look at by plant how much tonnage of material do we think we can get. And so we did some gross level assessments and in a couple cases went back and said, you know what, we think there's an issue. There's some things that got missed in the forecast because, we're expecting this kind of tonnage and we didn't see it. And so there was some back and forth, but in terms of really going into the details of the forecast, it's hard to do that except at a really gross level.
Right. Okay, we have a couple more questions for you. In terms of building a business case for investment in this type of technology for the folks, tuning in, who might be tasked with that, with that challenge, what recommendations, what suggestions might you have to help, build an effective business case for this type of investment?
Well, the first thing I would ask is are you satisfied with the types of metrics that you have today to manage your supply base? In today's world, most manufacturers are buying more from their suppliers than they are actually manufacturing in-house. And other than how much money you're spending or are you paying less for this part than you did a year ago, there aren't a lot of really good metrics to manage at I'd say a detailed level to manage your supply base. I know when I was at Allison, I was very frustrated about, is my supplier competitive? I get the question, are you going with the most competitive suppliers? Well, the only way I had to assess that was on a part-by-part, build up the cost basis, but nothing really to look across my entire supply base. So I think there's some things around, are you paying the right prices? Do you think there's value to really look at the total price on a part level basis? You should be paying versus what you are paying. There's clearly savings there on an individual part basis, but then looking at where is the value in having a better supply base? Are you talking to the right suppliers? And what metrics do you have to really identify, hey, this supplier really probably isn't the right supplier to me. This can help you identify that. The other thing that most manufacturers are dealing with today, and really have been for quite a while, is troubled suppliers that are in financial distress. And I used to tell my organization, if I can start addressing a troubled supplier 3 months before I know they're going to be in trouble, that 3 months is worth a huge amount of money to our organization. So you look at where are your troubled suppliers, and immediately you can assess, are there other suppliers that you can move those parts to, as well as what do I think it's going to cost me in terms of new pricing for those parts. So there's a lot of different topics on the purchasing side. Then when you go to engineering, it's harder to evaluate, but the reality is everybody knows if you can get your engineers and your suppliers talking to each other earlier on, you can save money during your design process. So I think those are the critical places that if you're looking at trying to build a case, you'd look across all of that. And I'd say the third thing is, this is something that really should improve your relationship with the suppliers. I found when I talked to the suppliers and I had a fact-based discussion, I was able to really develop great relationship with the suppliers, the facts I had were based on supplier quality. I always talked to my suppliers about supplier quality, and when there was an issue, we always went back to the data and had a data-driven discussion, and it really helped improve our relationship because we were very focused on data versus supposition. So in this case, you now have data and facts to be able to have a data-driven discussion or negotiation with a supplier that I think is really beneficial to the company over the long run.
Right, and in that business case discussion, I'm sure always the question of ROI, return on investment, comes up. And what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that? Specifically in terms of your solution.
Yeah, what we have. Yeah, I mentioned this in earlier in the presentation. What all of our customers have found is that they're able to pay for the first implementation within 4 to 6 months, so they get a full return for money in the first 4 to 6 months, and that tends to be through negotiating better pricing. We do identify where you're overpriced, and so there's the first step tends to be, hey, let's go in, let's get a quick ROI that we can measure, and we can look at the finance organization and say, hey, we've just paid for this product. Then the long term, your ROI really is tied into being more efficient at your processes and trying to run your business. But most of our customers have seen a 10-to-1 return on investment in the first 12 months after buying our product.
Well, very good. We've come to the end of our session, and again, I'd like to thank our speaker, Karen Caswell, CEO of Akoya, and on your screen you can see a link if you'd like to get more information about the company and about the solutions. Your link is shown right there. And also like to thank Akoya as our sponsor. And most of all, would like to thank all the folks who tuned in today. We hope you found the presentation interesting, informative, and we hope you'll join us for future presentations. Thanks very much.